Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. And also, the Search for the Ancient Bauble Kickstarter has launched, so make sure you go check that out. The Kickstarter campaign will last for 30 days, and after that, the playmat will no longer be available for purchase. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core Studio. Welcome to the show. So the far too early pre-spoiler season, Summer of Legend, fun times for all, whatever you want to call it, train continues. We've already seen a new 5-color legendary dragon with Tiamat. The Ur Dragon's gonna have some stiff competition with this one. And then we also saw Vorpal Sword and equipment that can win you the game. Or maybe I should say it can make other players lose the game. Regardless, this episode is about neither of those things. It's about an Enchantment Saga Land. Yes, I just said those 3 words together. And if you're confused from hearing those words together, I really don't blame you. It took quite a long time for me to wrap my head around what this card exactly is. So, with all that said, let's jump into it. Urza Saga, once just a set name, now it's a land that is also a saga, so yeah, that's confusing, but let's keep going. Anyways, this is an Enchantment Land saga, and like other sagas, as it enters the battlefield, and after your draw step, you add a lore counter to it, and then you sacrifice it after the 3rd lore counter. The first lore counter is Urza Saga gains tap, add colorless. The 2nd lore counter is Urza Saga gains pay 2 and tap, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And the 3rd lore counter is search your library for an artifact card with mana cost 0 or 1, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So there is a ton of things going on here, so let's break it down. This is a land that can tap for mana or eventually be able to make a construct, and eventually you have to sacrifice it and then you tutor for an artifact with a mana cost 0 or 1. So you will lose this land, though you do get to tutor something else into play. And keep in mind that that thing that you're tutoring has to have a mana cost of 0 or 1. And that's much different than if it said mana value 1 or less. So you couldn't say go get something with a mana value of 0, but an X in its cost like Chalice of the Void or Engineered Explosives. So I assume that's why they worded it in this way. Regardless, of course, there are plenty of incredibly powerful things that you can get with this. If you get this down on turn 1, you can get something on turn 3 that is incredibly impactful for your deck. Now, obviously the fact that this land can still tap for mana before you sacrifice it is important. And I'm not just trying to brush aside that 2nd lore counter, which can be effective in an artifact-centric deck. But essentially, again, you're only going to have 1 turn to actually activate that, and the important thing here, again, is going to be that tutoring. Again, there are plenty of powerful artifacts out there with a mana cost of 0 and 1. So first off, let's talk about some of those, and then we'll talk about the types of decks that might want to use this. So let's talk about those 1 mana cost artifacts, and of course we're starting with Soul Ring. Soul Ring is an artifact that costs 1 and it taps for 2, but I probably didn't have to tell you that. This is the most played card in Commander for a reason. It is the very definition of a fast mana rock, and it is incredibly overpowered. So yeah, essentially if you're sacrificing Urza Saga for this, you are ramping. You lost a land that taps for 1, but you got a mana rock that taps for 2. So yeah, essentially getting a free ramp spell on a land is huge. And keep in mind that you can still tap Urza Saga for mana before you sacrifice it, so you can still get some utility out of it on that turn. I guess I should say if you can utilize that mana on something like an instant or whatnot. Regardless, if you already ramped on turn 2 with something like a Signet, and then you get to turn 3, you essentially are going to have access to, what, 5 mana now? Just from playing this land, hitting your land drops, and playing another mana rock. So yeah, there's some really explosive things that you can do with Urza Saga. So of course, I also have to mention another fast mana rock with Mana Vault. Now, Mana Vault actually taps for 3, and it doesn't untap during your untap step, but at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 4 if you do untap it. At the beginning of your draw step, if it's tapped, it deals 1 damage to you. Basically, it's an improved Soul Ring with downside. But if you're in an artifact-centric deck, you probably have ways to untap this without paying its cost. Regardless, yeah, Sol Ring ramps you by 1, and this is essentially going to ramp you by 2. So yeah, this can catapult you really far ahead of your opponents. Now, of course, outside of mana rocks, there are plenty of fantastic artifacts out there with a mana cost of 1, and of course I've got to bring up Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp is an equipment that gives equipped creature +1/-1, and whenever equipped creature dies, you draw 2 cards. For many decks, this is a huge draw engine. Essentially, you just pay 1 to attach this to a 1/1 token that you have, and then that thing dies and you draw 2 cards. That is an absurd amount of value. And repeatable value as well for those types of decks. A token or aristocrat style deck can draw a ton of cards from this, and it is very much a key piece to many of those types of decks. So having a land that can just straight up just get you this for essentially free is huge. Okay, when I say free, yes, there is a cost to it. You are losing a land and you've got to wait a few turns, but still. Having a way that you don't essentially have to pay for to tutor this out is huge. Next up, let's move on to another card that can make a huge splash in a lot of decks with Sensei's Divining Top. It has pay 1, look at the top 3 cards of your library, and then put them back in any order, tap, draw a card, then put Sensei's Divining Top on top of its owner's library. This card can provide you an absurd amount of value, works great with commanders that care about the top card of their library, and can combo in various ways. Regardless, there's a reason why this card is $75, and it's banned in Modern and Legacy. So having a way to freely tutor it out from just a land in your deck is pretty good. But next, let's move on to a card from last year with the Ozolith. It's a legendary artifact that says, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. This card has found a home in a lot of counters matter builds. If you've got a +1 counters deck, this can provide you an absurd amount of value if you get it down early. Essentially, whenever your creatures die, if they had counters on them, they go onto this, then you move them onto another creature, and your counters essentially never leave play. You essentially just keep growing creatures, and yeah, you can take over the game from there. And obviously this works with other types of counters such as keyword counters, etc, etc. Regardless, it's just another great option for Urza Saga to get out for a lot of decks. Next up, let's talk about a fantastic piece of equipment with Basilisk Collar. It's a very simple equipment that gives equipped creature Death Touch and Lifelink. If you've got a commander with a ping effect that can dish out damage to creatures, this card is huge. It essentially turns whatever amount of damage they do to that creature or creatures to lethal damage. And you're going to be gaining life when it does that. So yeah, being able to tutor this out with a land can really improve those decks. And of course, I'm not going to forget to mention the most powerful card in the Magic universe with Wayfarer's Bauble. Just kidding, or am I? Side note, did you know that Wayfarer's Bauble is currently more expensive than Sol Ring and Arcane Signet? Maybe it should be reprinted. Reprint it, wizards. And no, the list doesn't count as a meaningful reprint. Reprint it in a set. Thank you. Anyways, let's talk about some 0 mana cost artifacts, and of course the first one I'm going to bring up is the incredibly expensive Mana Crypt. Mana Crypt is basically a free Sol Ring with a minor downside in Commander. And when I say minor, I mean very minor. Like Sol Ring, it taps for 2, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Mana Crypt deals 3 damage to you. So again, this is basically a free Sol Ring that essentially is going to, on average, deal 1.5 damage to you per turn. Or in other words, basically nothing because you're starting off with 40 life. So yeah, there's a reason why this is a $150 card. And it's also, again, a fantastic target for Urza Saga if you can afford it. And next up, speaking of if you can afford it, let's talk about the Moxes with Mox Opal, Chrome Mox, and Mox Diamond. Or at least I should say, let's talk about the legal Moxes in Commander. Mox Opal has Metalcraft, tap, add 1 mana of any color, activates ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So in an artifact-centric deck, you can easily meet that requirement. Chrome Mox has Imprint. When it enters the battlefield, may exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand, tap, add 1 mana of any of the exiled card's colors. And Mox Diamond says, when it comes into play, choose and discard a land card or sacrifice Mox Diamond, tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So unlike something like Sol Ring or Mana Crypt, getting these with Urza Saga isn't going to ramp you, but it will help you fix your mana and essentially replace your land. Or, you know, if you've got $600 to spare, you can grab your Lion's Eye Diamond. Its Oracle text reads, discard your hand, sacrifice Lion's Eye Diamond, add 3 mana of any one color, activate only as an instant. There are some decks where discarding your entire hand is actually a good thing, and also there are ways to combo this as well. So again, for those decks, and for those of you that have $600 to spare, congratulations, you've got yet another way to tutor this out. But if you're like me and you don't, let's move forward. to yet another expensive card with Jeweled Lotus. Jeweled Lotus says tap, sacrifice Jeweled Lotus, add 3 mana of any one color, spend this mana only to cast your commander. So this is kind of like Commander's Black Lotus in a way, but much more restricted. You get a burst of mana, but you can only use it on your commander. Now, I've actually talked about this card and my opinions on it at length in a few episodes, so I'll make this short. Getting it out early can obviously be incredibly impactful in the right deck, and getting it out later, it can kind of be a dead card. So being able to tutor out on turn 3 with Urza Saga can be an impactful play. Now, of course, I could go on and on about fantastic cards that Urza Saga can tutor out. But just keep in mind that there are a lot of useful artifacts out there at 1 and 0 mana. For example, if you're in a situation where you need to exile some graveyards, going and getting Tormod's Crypt can be the best play for you. In fact, it can be a game-saving play, and again, this is just from playing a land. So when you're adding Urza Saga into a deck, make sure you're considering what kinds of cards you can actually get with it. If it's just Sol Ring, well then what happens when you already have Sol Ring and you've got this land that is just going to die? Not saying that's not going to be useful, but make sure you're just considering it. Now let's move on to some commanders that might want to consider this card, and of course the first one that came to mind for Urza Saga is Urza. Urza is a 1/4 human artificer that says, when it enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with, this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And by tapping an untapped artifact you control, you add colorless. On top of that, you can pay 5 to shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. So yeah, Urza does an absurd amount of things and really cares about artifacts. So a land that can either help make you another construct or can help you get an artifact for whatever situation that you're in can be very useful for this commander. Now, obviously I could bring up a multitude of artifact-centric commanders, and I just wanted to bring up Urza to highlight pretty much them all. A land that can go get you an artifact that's key and crucial to the deck can be huge. And in an artifact-centric deck, you're going to have a lot of fantastic options to go and get. Also though, keep in mind that this land is also an enchantment. So first up, keep in mind that it triggers things like Constellation, and also enchantment-based commanders can utilize it as well. So for example, someone like Zur the Enchanter can actually tutor this out if you really wanted to. It says when it attacks, you may search your library for an enchantment card with converted mana cost 3 or less, put it onto the battlefield. If you do, shuffle your library. So you can essentially temporarily ramp yourself by getting you this land, and then you also get an artifact when it's sacrificed. Now, is Zur the best example for an enchantment commander? No, I was just trying to show you off some of the utility that it has with commanders like this though. Also, a land-centric commander like Titania could utilize this as well. When she enters the battlefield, return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield, and whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 5/3 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Because Urza Saga is again a saga, you have to sacrifice it. So you sacrifice it, go get your artifact, and then you also get a 5/3. And if you've already sacrificed it, Titania can get you it back if you want. Again, there are plenty of land-centric commanders out there that care about their lands coming in and dying, so pick and choose which ones you want. And of course, a commander that can get any kind of permanent back like Muldrotha can really utilize it as well. Muldrotha says during each of your turns you may play up to 1 permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. So if you really wanted to, after you've sacrificed it, you can just keep getting it back into play. Essentially be a repeatable delayed tutor for some fantastic artifacts for that deck. Again, when it comes to potential commanders, there are a lot of potential options for Urza Saga. If you're in a 1 or maybe even 2 color deck and you've got a lot of artifact options for this to tutor for, it's definitely going to be a consideration. And now it's time for me to wrap things up and give you my final thoughts on this card. This is a really unique and interesting design to say the least. And yes, it is a very powerful land and probably is going to see a lot of play in a good amount of decks. One thing to consider, and I want to thank Eddie for bringing this up to me, is the fact that this is a lot easier to remove than other lands. The fact that this is an enchantment on top of a land means that a lot more removal spells can take care of it. Now, is it always going to be worth it for that player to utilize a removal spell on your land? Well, maybe. Again, depending on the situation and what other things are on the board, there are a lot of possibilities on what you can tutor up, and that player is probably going to know that. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about adding this to one of your decks. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.